Take my bride, let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile. Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. Living in the greater Cleveland area as I do, I see lots of orange and brown. These are the colors of Cleveland's football team, and fans will put those colors on their homes, cars, clothes, and even other places I won't discuss to show their enthusiasm and support for their local team. Within the American NFL, the teams all have their specific individual colors, and for football ignoramuses like myself, this color coding is helpful. But this is just a single sport in one country. What about international sports? If the competitors just use their national colors, how will you know who is who? Let's take red, white, and blue, for example. If all the teams just use their national colors, you could have American, British, Russian, French, Icelandic, Liberian, and Paraguayan, sportsmen competing internationally and not able to tell them apart. They all use the same colors. This was a growing concern at the turn of the 20th century in global, competitive sports, car racing being no exception. So, let's take a brief dive into the history of international auto racing colors. Car colors actually begin with numbers and horse racing in the early 19th century. It grew into common practice to have the lane number that the horse was assigned to be worn on the horse, jockey, or both. Often, jockeys would wear colored jerseys that identified their nationality as well, though this was not usually required by the racing authorities. Later that century, when bicycle racing became popular, the practice was continued into that sport as well, though the numbers did not necessarily identify specific lanes. Not all bike races were on tracks. Instead, they showed either the order in which they signed up to the race or the order of their qualifying time or pole position. And of course, individual racers often wore their national colors that they would become known by. So when auto racing began in the 1890s, the number systems used in cycle racing were simply borrowed from there. Colors were not mandated. In those first car races, the numbers on the cars were either earned through qualifying rounds or assigned by rote. Yet this would change rather quickly as international racing really got rolling. Even before the first Gordon Bennett Cup of 1900, car makers across Europe were competing for race wins and would send teams to just about any race that they could find. Makers like Didion Bouton, Benz, Fiat, Peugeot, Renault, Napier, and many others would send sometimes as many as a half a dozen cars, drivers, and mechanics to a single race. To deal with this, the numbering system was quite often modified. Though in some races each car would be assigned its own number regardless of the company or national affiliation, this was not always the case. As early as 1896, it became common to give a single number to a car maker to distribute amongst the drivers. This was done by adding a suffix to the number. For example, let's say you're the Scottish car maker Errol Johnson, and you are sending 5 cars with their drivers and mechanics to a major race in France. You've been assigned the number 1701. So you'll have cars 1701A, 1701B, 1701C, and 1701D. Of course, you'll also have just 1701. No bloody A, B, C, or D. As far as car colors go, This was left to the individual teams involved, but most often the cars were painted the colors of the nationality of their respective driver. And it was known to sometimes happen that a car was a particular color because it was the only color paint the builders had it on at the time. No specific requirements regarding car colors was expressed by the various racing authorities prior to 1900. And it makes sense that they didn't. The number system worked fine, and you could easily identify each individual car on the track. And by the turn of the 20th century, there could be hundreds of cars involved in a race. Numbers could be handed out the day of the race. Painting a car takes a bit more time to do, and for race officials to require specific and different colors for various races across the world was just totally impractical and unnecessary. If a car's color was going to represent a specific nation at an auto race, it would be up to the teams themselves to make that happen, which they did for the most part do. This would change with the Gordon Bennett Cup races. First held in 1900, each participating team could choose their national colors and had to paint the cars said colors. The Americans chose red, Belgium picked yellow, Germany chose white, and France chose blue. These nations would all be assigned these colors for all remaining cup races, whether they participated or not. This was not an issue until 1902, when Great Britain entered the cup races, and their actual national flag colors of red, white, and blue had already been taken, so they went with green. These colors would remain the national colors for the rest of the cup races, the last of which was in 1905. It is noteworthy that the cup race rules did require that all involved, driver, mechanic, and car, be from the same country, which was not found in typical rules of other national racing organizations. The end of the Gordon Cup was the beginning of the Grand Prix, which first held in 1906. These races were organized and officiated by the Automobile Club of France, and for the first few years did not make many rules about the national colors. Keep in mind that the ACF was wanting to put some distance between themselves and Gordon Bennett at the time, and relaxing the color rules was one way to do this. Yet many of the teams continued to use their colors through to the First World War and beyond. Perhaps most famously, British green. Much like John Deere's color, British green is a specific hue that was used by Selwyn Edge at the 1903 Gordon Bennett Cup, which was held in Ireland. He chose that color to honor the Irish shamrock, and thus true British racing green is actually Irish, and it was picked by an Australian. Italy would be the first to duplicate another country's color, choosing to make their cars red along with the Americans in 1907. Rather than throw a fit, the Yanks just started going with two-tone cars, blue and white. And so World War I was averted for the time. The Germans continued to use white well into the 1930s, while the French still use blue to this day. And as new nations entered the racing fray, new colors were chosen for them. By the early 1930s, national colors for Grand Prix racing were well established and documented. They have, of course, been modified, updated, and spread across all kinds of motorsports since then, and how they have developed to their modern form is a fascinating study in and of its own. Today's racing colors are quite complex and still developing with each new racing season. Many specific manufacturers, Ferrari being one example, are known for their color along with their nation. Many corporate sponsors are known for their specific colors, and we'll add that in. And then not all manufacturers in some countries even follow their own color schemes. Racing colors are still complicated, befitting their origin, but at least we can still watch a race and know who was who, because every car still has a number. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.